Not empty, not empty, certainly not finished. My brain and learning is an absolute mess, as you can see. But believe it or not, there's actually a method behind the madness that helps me learn almost everything that I consume. You can see I started collecting things in this specific Obsidian vault on the 21st of the 6th, 2021. And today it is the 16th of the 8th, which makes it just under 2 months. And in that time, I've accumulated 2,346 files and 39 folders. Great, but what does that actually mean? Well, those files are spread across my vault as daily journals, so different thoughts I've explored, and loads of other notes. And most of those notes are capture notes. You can see there's 885 capture notes. And a capture note to me is anything I have taken. So that could be articles, images, Instagram, podcasts, tweets, and videos. As you can see, lots and lots of videos. Well, how do these notes actually help with my learning? Well, in this video, I'm going to go through exactly what I do with all of the notes, how I take them, what I do with them, and how they become actual knowledge. Now, first things first, I actually need to consume some information, and walking the dog today, I actually listened to a couple of podcasts. So Fractions is a podcast by Seth Godin, and I actually took these notes on my phone. I know, I went outside, very odd, but I went outside, I walked the dog, and I took notes on this podcast. I have the link in here, so when I click, I can go back to the podcast. Now you can see the plus button is there because I've taken it off my episodes because I've listened to it. I don't need to see it again, but it is in my note just in case I want to go back and listen to it again because it might be a good podcast. Who knows? Now this is just one note that I've taken today, a fairly small note because it was a fairly short podcast, but if I go to my daily note and then I go to yesterday, you can see here are the notes that I made on that day and some different links, the green dots being capture notes that I've actually put into processing, so I've done something with them. I haven't just taken the note and gone, yep, leave it there. I've actually gone through and moved the highlighted points to another page. That's because they're green. If we go back to today's note, you can see they're orange currently because I haven't done anything with them because they're still there. If I carry on going backwards in time, you can see there's some days with lots, some days with not too many. Wow, look at that day. We got 3 red dots. Red dots being either a book. Look at the name of that book. That was Mark Manson's book. There's another book, and there's another book. Wow, 3 different books on the same day. Now, I don't actually read books. They're books that were referenced by something else. So you can see this is a book, and that was linked to this video. And this is another book, and this was also linked to the same video. So I don't actually read the books. And this was... Ooh, what is this? This is a book that I just found from Building Acumen, which is a different podcast. There we go. And that's the podcast linked to a different book. So I've obviously processed that note on a different day, which is why it's appeared on that day. Hopefully that makes sense. So if I go back to today, that's a keyboard shortcut. So Control-Shift-Y for me. For those of you that haven't seen how I use Obsidian, I have done a long video explaining everything that I do. But that is the first level of these capture notes. I take the note, whether it's on my phone or my computer, and they sit over here as files like this. And then I need to process or do something with them. Now, it's a little bit later in the day, I have taken more notes, and there are still more notes to be taken. I don't know how many, because my watch later list is rather large, and some videos have lots of notes, other videos not so much. This is a note I've recently just taken, as of like 2 minutes ago, and I figured I'd go through how essentially I did it. So, as you can see, this is the first point that was brought up. This is the next point that was brought up. These aren't necessarily highlightable points, they're just points that I thought, you know what, that might be interesting, and see where that links. This is another point that's related to self-care, which is why it's been indented. Tea and coffee, week organised by day, and then we've got a phone day, a writing day, exercise. So what this is Tim Ferriss has answered a question, and this is basically his day. This is what he explained during this video, and I can match this up to older videos because it will be linked in the same page later on when I go through that processing, but all of these things are there. Then, as you can see, we've got a line break, and this basically means that he's talking about something else. It's something completely different. And going down the page, that's basically what I do. If it's a new point, I just leave a break, have the point, and then if there is something inside that point, I will then put it slightly indented across. And if there's something else, I'll then indent that, etc., etc. What this link is here is the book. Now, I remember Tim talking about the book, and I recognized the name of the book. I've never read this book. I have no idea what it's about. But I remember the name. I thought, you know what, I think I know that one. So I clicked on 2 brackets. I then searched the name of the book, Man's Search for Meaning, and it's a book. And that's when I first found the book. That's the author of the book. And if I was to go into this page, so let's have a very quick look, you can see I'm going to bring up the links. I also saw it in Building Acumen, that podcast. There we go. This podcast that Tim was talking to Jacqueline about, that is the podcast that I first heard this book about. And as we go down the page, you can see there's loads more notes, loads more points, and a few more books that have been mentioned. And what we have here is a comment. Now, for me, what I do is when someone says something, or someone talks about something or references something, and it reminds me of something I've seen or heard of elsewhere, I will then put it in a comment so I know this is actually my original thought, So I can then, when I'm processing it, which I'll go through later, I can then go, oh, let's link it to this, or can I put this in a page, or is this going to be a page on its own? So, before I actually go through that processing, I'm going to carry on consuming more information. Now, during this very fidgety time-lapse, I've got a couple of things going on. Mainly, I've got my headphones on so I can hear what the video is actually saying. This is a long video, so this is an hour 20 video. Then, on the second screen, I have Obsidian up to take my notes, and I've used the capture template, so I have the title of the page, the date I created it, so it links back to the day, the author, and then any other guest that is in the conversation, whether that's a podcast or a group conversation, whatever it happens to be, and then the source in case I want to go back to it. Now, my camera does run out of battery, but I promptly replace it so we can carry on with the time lapse. And I want to just highlight a couple of things that I do. So when I'm listening to this, I don't actually look at the screen all the time, but I listen to the screen when I'm paying attention to what it is that they're saying. Very similar to a conversation or a lecture that I would listen to at university. I would pay attention, really close attention, when I'm listening intently. Otherwise, I'm looking out into space, and oftentimes I'm in my own head thinking about different links, different ideas, different analogies of what it is that they're talking about. Oftentimes you will see me reacting, smiling, laughing because it's reminded me of something, or I agree with what it is that they've said. I do keep my phone on with notifications facing towards me so I can see them, so I can see if someone's texted me or sent me a message or whatever, and I also get notifications, and you'll see at some point during the time lapse that I actually go through some of the notifications and go watch later, because they've brought a point up, I've noted the point down, and then they're expanding on the thought, giving some context, but I understand the point, I understand the context, and I have it in my head, so I'm listening in the background whilst doing something else, so it's just done there, out of the way. So I do other things whilst listening or watching a video, because sometimes there is fluff or there is parts of the conversation that I don't necessarily need to pay that much attention to, but it's going on in the background, keeping my mind ticking over, that I can just do something else. And you will also see towards the end of the time lapse, I actually go through the comment section, because I find a lot of times there are different opinions, different thoughts, different perspectives on the discussion that's going on in the comment section. And sometimes there are some really nice quotes or ideas to explore in the comment section. Now, because I'm a bit of a night owl, and I actually process my notes between 12 and 1 AM every night, so I can't really go talking out loud at my microphone at 1 in the morning, because it would wake the house up. So it's actually the next day, and I'm going to go through processing the notes from yesterday, and one of the notes I actually have already taken today. So going down the list, this is the first note that's there, which is why I'm going through this one first. This is the book, very similar to what I showed you earlier. This is just the book that Caroline was talking about in this. It was a podcast, but it was a video podcast on YouTube. You can see the link has YouTube in it. And she was talking about lots of different things, mainly about memory, neuroplasticity, because that's where her work is focused. So what I'm going to do is go through the note, think of other thoughts and other notes I already have around that thought, and copy and paste the highlighted point in. So thought is a big picture, is a way of thinking, which is actually a note I already have. So I've opened up my quick switcher, which it doesn't really matter what app you're in, just go to wherever the note is. And now I'm going to Control Enter, because I want it as another page. Now I have two panels open. This is essentially going to be the panel that I'm changing all over so I can copy and paste things into. And then I'm going to copy this point and then paste it into this note. Then I'm going to link the note below the point as essentially a reference. So when I am working in the note, I can then just put that as a footnote in the reference, which I'll go through later on. Added the wrong one in at first because I just assumed it would be the top one. It wasn't. So now I've got that in there, I can actually put it in somewhere else because I think it applies somewhere else. Now you can see I've typed in memory and it's got loads of other things that have come up, but I know I have a processing note on working memory, so I'm still working on this note. There's no working note in here, as you see these are all capture notes, and during this process when I'm going through putting points into other notes, I don't really care that much about the capture notes because they're just notes that I've taken. They're not notes that I'm working in or I'm processing, so even though they're not needed now, they're still needed for reference when I am looking at a working note and I want to go back to the original source. So again, exactly the same thing, copy and paste it over, find the reference, put the reference in, and now this is done. So I'm going to do that for the rest of all of these notes. Now this process can take between 10 minutes to an hour, sometimes even longer. It basically depends how many notes I've taken and how many places the points in the note actually go. So sometimes there's a really small note that's done in a couple of seconds. Other times I've listened to a podcast that's got no notes in, so again it only takes a couple of seconds. But other times there's a video or a podcast that has loads and loads and loads of notes in that apply all over the place. So that one note could take 20 minutes itself just to put all the points in different places, but I don't normally have many of those notes in one day, so almost all of the time my note process gets done within an hour. So sometimes these points from notes are going into working notes, and they're somewhat fleshed out thoughts that have some rationale justification behind them. Other times, there are highlighted points that are going into a very overarching note because the note has got just so many points in and I still need to process and work through that note, and I just haven't got around to doing it. So the point from whatever I've captured is still being put in my system to go through, but I'm not actually thinking about it now. It's just being put somewhere, so when I am going to go through things that are related, I don't have to go find it, it's already there, ready for me to go. So this part of the process is less about actually doing any thinking or expansion on the highlighted point, it's more about putting the point in a place that I would expect to see it when I do want to explore that idea, explore that thought, or spend time fleshing out whatever it is that the point is gone to. What this means is when I'm going through a note, I don't have to think about, what points do I need to put in here? What videos have I watched? What podcasts have I watched? What articles have I read that relate to this point? Because all of the points are already in that note, ready for me to expand on. Now, some of those points might be irrelevant to what it is that I'm thinking at the time, and that is where they will be put into other processing notes, other working notes, but that whole process I will go through once the time lap is finished. So it is again another day, because most of the work that I do with my notes is actually in the afternoon or in the evening, which is later on at night, and obviously I can't talk. So today, as you can see, I've got a couple of other notes, but I'll process those later. What I'm going to do now, though, is go through my starred notes. So any of these notes that you would have seen in the last section that I've processed, sometimes I add a highlighted point to a note, and that working note now becomes a processing note. So in the graph view, instead of it being orange, i.e. it's a working note, it will go dark blue. Now yellow is the active note, that's currently today. And if I go into our personal philosophy, this is a note. This is a processing note currently, so you can see here, this is another processing note, etc. Some of those could be those massive long notes, others just really small notes that I just need to do a couple of things to. And those processing notes that I want to do a couple of things to are here, and they have been starred. It's a core plugin in Obsidian. You could do that in any way in the application that you use, and you can see these orange ones are working notes that I finished with. When I look at this note, there doesn't seem to be anything that I need to do, but when I go into the editor mode, you can see, well, this is a note that I need to actually go through, and this is something that I've taken. This is actually a blog, so this is one of the journals, the audio journals that I do every day, and this is what those yellow dots are. This is one of those, this is another one, and the yellow could also be a video project that I've put this specific note in. So this is actually a blog, and this is where I spoke about whatever this stuff is, and what I'm going to do is apply this into this sentence somewhere in here so that it makes sense. And the reason I have this up is so that if it applies somewhere else, or maybe it doesn't quite fit in this note and actually fits in one of the other notes, I can just quickly jump to it. So I can click there, and now we're in this note, etc., etc. So I'm going to do that for all of these notes. I'm going to try and do that for all of these notes, and I'll see you when I get there. Now, as you can imagine, some of these notes will be very easy to include the point. It's just a case of adding a couple of words in and then putting the reference there. Other notes, however, there may be a couple of points in there that don't quite match what I have written or what the idea or thought is. So I may actually create a new working note page, add the highlighted point into that page, and then speak about it and then expand on that in a different page. And you'll see later on in the time lapse that I actually create quite a lot of new working note pages where the point doesn't quite match the note it's been put in. So I've added a note, I've made a new note, put the point in the new note, and then I related that new note in the original note that the highlighted point was in. And what that actually means is that new note that I've made from the point normally applies in other working notes as well. So you'll actually see I open up a couple of other working notes that weren't on my processing and start mixing around and changing ideas, and actually create a couple of notes that I had no intention of exploring. But because the ideas are linked, the thoughts are linked, I actually created different working notes that I wasn't expecting to work on. And something else working through my starred notes is my starred notes aren't necessarily category specific. So I could be going through a note on sport or on coaching, and then the next starred note is something completely different. So I'm context switching every time I go to a different starred note. Now, it's not normally a massive different context, but because of all the things I've currently been working on and currently been thinking through, maybe creating new working notes or whatever those happen to be, when I am going through that starred note, those links are already front of mind. So I'm thinking about linking whatever it is that I was working on with what I'm now working on. So I can make links that I just never would have thought of because I've just switched the context. Something I did explore between these two clips, and something I did find out about in the Obsidian Discord, is that the comment section, the comments that I have, the highlighted points in comments, may not necessarily show when it goes to the what you see, what you get editor. So in order to sort of future-proof myself, I actually decided to get rid of the comments and put a divider line in there instead. So when I look at a working note, I'll have the main block at the top, I'll then have a divider line with any comments below, and then another divider line with the references at the bottom, so that's why you'll see it slightly change as you go down. Now, as I'm working through these notes, when I actually make a new note, it will go processing, and then when I've finished with the note, I will then move it to the working folder. So you'll see me pop up a screen, it will go to working, and then once I've moved it to working, I will then take the star off, which is the same shortcut, or S for me, and then I know I've finished with the note. Something I will say now, which I don't actually show in the time lapse, is if there is a note that I have made that I don't file, when I go back to my file explorer, it will be in that section underneath all of my folders because I haven't sorted it and it's just sitting there. So I will always catch notes that haven't been filed because they're just going to show up on my essentially to-do later list in my notes. Some of the notes were captured quite a while ago, so either I've lost context or I've forgotten about something, or I'm not sure on a specific stat or a specific detail, which is when I go back to the capture note, go to the source, and I think you see me bring up a video at some point, where I need to recontextualize and re-understand what it is that was going on, because either my note-taking wasn't that good, or I've missed something out, or I've forgotten something that I thought I would remember, so not everyone's perfect, so I have that source note just in case. Now, when I am going through all of these, I'm trying to reword them in the best way possible, best way being, as I explained in my note-taking series, a working note, so explaining in plain language, and that's essentially what all of these notes are. They're flashcards that are individual, so I could go into any note, any flashcard, and I would know exactly what is going on, exactly what it's talking about by itself. It doesn't need to rely on the links that I have. So they're kind of like cue cards for me, or for anyone else that I'm teaching or explaining things to, using essentially the Feynman's technique. I'm explaining things in simple terms, and each of those notes is that. So you'll see some of these notes actually get smaller because my understanding is slightly better and clearer, and I've just managed to condense all of those words into a couple of sentences. Now, I use the term flashcard mainly because whenever I'm looking at a working note, I can see the link. So the orange words are essentially flashcards, they're links. And whenever I see that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what is involved in that card, in that note? Because I don't have to go into the note every time, I can just see it, oh yeah, that's what this is about, that's what that is about. And I can ask myself questions in my head, okay, what does that topic mean? What does that word mean? What does that statement mean? And that's what active recall is. You have a question and you try and answer that question. And to me, I can ask as many questions as I want for the same flashcard-ish note, because it's a statement. All of my titles of my notes are statements. So you can see, so every working note kind of becomes a flashcard in a sense, because I can ask questions about it and then get the answers when I go into the page, and then further explore that when I do go into the page. And this is where the idea of sort of unregulated space repetition comes in, because I'm living in my notes. Whenever I have a link, or whenever I try and think or link ideas together, I'm thinking of the name of the card, the note, to then link the idea to. So I have to actively recall what it is that I'm doing, and because it's over different periods of time, there could be a note, a card that I haven't experienced or seen for 2 weeks or a month, even longer. So I have to remember, what was that card called and what was included on that card, so I can actually make the link, because sometimes I can think of the link, I can think of the reference, I can think of the point, but I can't exactly remember what it actually relates to. And that's where living in my notes actually helps me learn almost everything that I write down, because I have to work in my notes and remember what I wrote down, where it applies, where it links, and what the actual application of thought, the idea, the theory is. Now, that process on its own is learning in itself, but I actually go a little bit further than that most of the time, and I put those working notes into something. I create something from them. Most of the time, I create more than one piece of content from one note. So some of those notes are actually in 5 of my previous videos. A lot of the note-taking notes are all included in my note-taking series. And the example I'm going to go through now is my weekly recap, which is actually my podcast, because if I was to do it for a video, there's lots of different backwards and forwards that I take, so this is just going to be an easier way to go through it step by step. But if you are interested in me explaining how I go through all of that learning, then let me know in the comment section below. So in Obsidian, again, I'm on a different day, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up a workspace. So I have a weekly review workspace, which automatically, you can see it brings up this, and you can't see the local graph view because I don't want to see that when I'm working like this. Then I actually have my previous week. So I'm going to fold all those up. You can see this is what I did last week, and what I'm going to do is open this week's note. So now all of these days have changed. You can see all those points have now disappeared because this is the most recent week. If I go into preview, you can see that hasn't actually been created. That's the recap. That's the script of what it is that I'm going to be working through. Now, because it's a weekly recap, these aren't processing notes or working notes because I haven't done anything with them. They're actually capture notes. So what I do is I pin this. You can see it's now pinned up here. That was a shortcut, Control-Shift-P on my keyboard. And now I'm going to open up this note. And with this note, I have all of these different points, and what I'm going to do is go through, basically check them and go, okay, is this an interesting point? No. Is there an interesting point in there? Maybe, and then I will bring it in. So once I've done that for all of this, I will then come back. So during this process, I have a few rules that I try to follow. The first one being I can only take one main point or main idea from a capture note. So if I did listen to a podcast that had loads and loads of points on it, I'm only going to take one big theme, one big point, one key takeaway into my weekly review for me to expand on. The second thing is that if the point isn't really that exciting to me at the time of making the recap, then I don't bother exploring it, because what I want to do is explore different ideas that really intrigue me. It really brings out my curiosity, because that's when I'm actually going to be excited to create the content, to create the note, to do something with it. So you will see me just skip past some of those points. It's not that I don't think the point is valuable, it's just it's not where my interest lies at that moment in time, and because it's in my system, I will come across some of those points, actually almost all of those points, when I am processing and working in my notes, so they will become parts of videos, parts of my philosophy of practice, just not this review. And the third rule-ish that I try and look out for are themes. So because this is over a week, I could have captured 3 or 4 different pieces of content from maybe a blog, a podcast, and a video, all covering a similar topic. And even though that may not be my curiosity right now, obviously there is something that I've been interested in throughout the week because I've got a theme going on there, or maybe that's a theme in the world. So I will put that together, so when I'm scripting it out, those things go together, and I can then explore that one idea from 3, 4, 5 different perspectives, which actually helps me understand what it is that's either going on in the world because it's a trend, or helps me understand that topic because, oh, this is why I was actually interested in these topics to start with throughout the week. Now that was a somewhat quick overview of how I try and remember everything that I consume. As you can see, I consume a lot of information, all of it's completely free online, but what I actually do with all of this information is create stuff. I make things with it. Now in future videos, what I'm going to do is go into more depth about things that I'm learning through the notes, rather than just a bit of an overview, which this video was. So do let me know in the comment section below if you have any topics, thoughts, or ideas about future videos maybe I could explore and then give you some insights on. But until then, get off YouTube and do something productive with your time instead.